Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Mindful in Minutes podcast. I'm Kelly, and today we're going to be talking about non-attachment. So, all about non-attachment. This is something that I first learned about when I was taking my 200-hour yoga teacher training over 10 years ago. What year was that? It was the same year that I graduated college, I don't know why I'm dating myself here. And I graduated college in 2012, right? Yeah, I think that's right. So that would have been 13 years ago. Okay. With that being said, so 13 years ago was when I was first introduced to this idea of non-attachment, because it's one of the yamas in yoga. And I believe when I talked about kind of the 8-limbed path and Patanjali in a Freeform episode, I talked about the different limbs, one of them being the yamas, which is kind of like how you interact with yourself if you're really kind of living this like yogic life. And this concept of non-attachment really stuck with me because not only is it an extremely challenging practice, but it's something that could be a liberating practice. And also it's one that I found myself thinking a lot about, like, how do you actually do this? How do you take this kind of ancient concept and apply it to like an everyday life, like a modern life? And it's just something that I've been seeing pop up more recently with things like the Let Them theory from Mel Robbins, her new book, which is a lot about kind of non-attachment. She calls it the Let Them theory, but talks a lot about detaching, non-attachment, things like that. And I just feel like I'm seeing more people kind of have these questions that I have too, as to how do you actually practice non-attachment, something that, as we'll talk about, is sort of this foundational practice for Buddhism or Buddhist monks. And it's one thing to practice non-attachment, like when you are a Buddhist monk, for example, living in kind of this communal living where you have dedicated your life to your religion and your spirituality and all of that, versus when you're just like an everyday person walking around with like a 9-to-5 job and family, living in a, complex world. How do you practice non-attachment with that? And it's so much deeper than just like letting things go or not being tied to outcomes. And so I wanted to dive into it. I wanted to explore it. So what is non-attachment? So often you'll see non-attachment as being described as kind of this principle of non-possessiveness or non-greediness, like where it really involves letting go of attachments to material possessions and recognizing that true contentment comes from within rather than the accumulation of material wealth. And this is one component of non-attachment. This is like one part of it, but it's actually so much deeper than that. And non-attachment, it doesn't mean that you don't care. This is one of the biggest misconceptions, that like you don't care, that it's really not about being cold or distant or detached. It's not about like shutting your heart down or being in your own personal bubble where nothing else happens. It's like nothing exists except for what's happening within my little bubble. Non-attachment itself is actually what allows you to care more deeply, but with more peace and kind of less grasping or clinging and some more freedom. Another sort of helpful clarification that I find is the difference between non-attachment and detachment. I know they sound really similar, but they're different. So detachment often implies like shutting down, withdrawal, emotional numbing. It's like taking the computer and like just shutting it down, right? Just total detachment, like just disconnect, like shut down. Where non-attachment is the full presence, like without the clinging or without the, sometimes it's called like the stickiness. It's about being with an experience or an emotion, but without really being consumed or defined by it. So you're not necessarily, maybe a computer isn't a good analogy here, but you're not just like shutting down or completely numbing or just like withdrawing. You are still living life and you're there with full presence, but you're experiencing it without fully being consumed by that thing. So non-attachment and detachment, two different things. And non-attachment, it means really not getting overly attached to, of course, material things, but also desires, outcomes, even like self-concepts, like your identity, and it allows for just more flexibility and more of an open interaction with life. So using non-attachment really helps to foster inner freedom, peace, and well-being by minimizing the suffering that's caused by clinging to specific expectations or identities or fears or things. So in the yogic tradition, as I mentioned, this practice is known as aparigraha, and it's one of the yamas. And the yamas are kind of like really high level. They're like the ethical foundations of yoga. So there's yamas and niyamas. And the yamas is kind of like how you interact with yourself, where the niyama is a little bit more about how you interact with the world around you. And aparigraha literally means non-grasping or non-possessiveness. So sometimes you'll see it translated as a set of non-attachment, like non-possessiveness. And at its core, it's about letting go of our need to control outcomes, people, or even who we think we need to be in order to feel okay, which even if we just take that for a moment, like hit the mental pause button, I'm going to say all of that again. And I want you to just imagine with what I'm about to say, what would life be like if you're able to do this, if you're able to let go of our need to control outcomes, people, or who we think we need to be in order to feel okay. I know if I was able to do that, my life would be completely different. It would be completely different, especially for me, like controlling the outcomes. I don't know if it's like my Capricorn moon or honestly, probably part of it, my ADHD and the coping mechanisms that I have acquired because of it to be like a little bit more organized and controlled in a way to kind of combat that neurodivergence. But like my life would be so different, even if I learned how to not do even one of those three things, control outcomes, people, or who we think we need to be in order to feel okay. So think of it like this. Attachment is really this like the clench that we feel when we're afraid of losing something, a relationship, a role, a dream, an identity, even a person. And non-attachment is the softening of that grip. So it's like opening that clenched hand that's gripping onto that thing and learning how to say and believe like, I love this, I value this, I'm so glad I have this, but I trust it'll be okay no matter what happens. Or I accept that I own nothing. It's all on loan. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is forever. The harder I grasp, it's not going to change anything. You're just going to get like a cramp in your hand from grasping so hard. And I think about this a lot. There's a book, a very small book that one of my students gave me years ago called The Holy Man. And she found it to be really healing after she lost someone, after the passing of someone. And in that book, they were talking about the loss of someone and said, it was just time to give him back. It was time for him to, go back and to give him back. He was on loan for you, to you in this life. And like how beautiful and how special that you were given this thing in this life, but it was never yours to keep or to own. It was time to give him back. And that was a really healing concept for her. I remember she gave me this book when we were studying. She was in my teacher training when we were studying kind of this non-attachment. And she was talking about this idea of like non-attachment to people in a way. And later on in the episode, towards the end, I want to talk about how you can practice non-attachment, like the really tough stuff, not in like kind of a, like toxic positivity way. You'll never hear me say like just, oh, someone died or you just went through this tragic, awful thing. Like, oh, just let it go. Just release your grasp. It'll all be fine. But I do want to talk a little bit about how do you apply some of these things in like a real kind of complex world with, real tough situations. So we'll talk about that towards the end. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, great, Kelly, but like what if something like really bad happens? Then what do? We'll talk about that as well. But at least for now, think of non-attachment as like, I accept that I own nothing. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is forever. And just softening the grasp that you have on these things that really are out of our control or often out of our control, and realizing that just clinging onto something isn't necessarily going to change the outcome or get you what you want. So in the Bhagavad Gita, they have this really nice quote that I always think about when I think about non-attachment. And it's, you have the right to your actions, but not to the fruits of your actions. So in other words, it's like, do your best show up fully, love, live life, but don't cling to how it's all going to turn out. And I think the reason I'm so drawn to non-attachment is because it is so against who I am, like at my core in a way. Not that I don't know. I'm such a doer and a to-do list person. And, I talk about my color-coded spreadsheets and I joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, this is just a full-blown truth. But like when what hits the fan, I'm like, okay, like I stay very calm, very low. I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? Let's start to make a list. Let's start moving forward, one foot in front of the other. What's the first thing we're going to do? First, we're going to do this. Okay, then we're going to do that. Okay, then we're going to do this. And like, that's how I personally work through things in life. And that trickles and seeps into other aspects of my life. I also, have a tendency to be a more anxious person. All of these things, this sort of natural inclination to struggle with non-attachment, being more anxious, all of these things is what has drawn me to the practice of meditation, because meditation, mindfulness is really the antidote to all of these things that I am describing, these kind of natural inclinations for things that really aren't serving me. And that's part of what drew me to yoga and meditation to begin with years ago. And non-attachment is one thing that is still, I think, is truly one of these lifelong processes that you're always working on. I don't think there's ever a point, maybe, I'm sure that like some of these Buddhist monks have been practicing it their whole lives, like they really get the hang of it. But I'm still getting there. And I think it's one of those things that is kind of a constant, just a constant struggle in a way. And as life changes, it changes too. And as your circumstances change, like I feel like I was getting a lot better at non-attachment. And then I became a parent. And I was like, oh, now there's this whole new world of things that I want to control the outcome. Like I think about the first day that I dropped Pork Chop off at preschool. And like he also, he is my child. So he also has some, anxious tendencies. And, I knew he was going to have kind of a bumpy first day. He wasn't thrilled, to put it lightly, about, new people, new places, being left there, all of these things. And I just had to accept that he was going to have the day that he was going to have. And at a certain point, I had to release the attachment to the outcome and just accept that I couldn't control this one. And I could do everything to help support him, but I couldn't control that one. And that was tough. And it's something that as our life changes too, sometimes attachment or non-attachment becomes easier, more challenging. And I have found since becoming a parent, it has become much more challenging. So anyways, there's my little tangent. But a non-attachment, again, when you think about it, it's really about living and loving with like your whole heart, but also knowing that you are not defined by what happens or by what you have or, what stays or even how others react to what you do. That's the one that I feel like I'm really getting a lot better at, is the non-attachment to like others' reactions or others' thoughts, what other people do. It's more kind of just what's in like my particular orbit. And I actually found this blog on Insight Timer. I didn't even realize I had a blog, but I found this blog post all about non-attachment. And in it actually shared some examples, like everyday examples of what attachment looks like. And I felt like it was really helpful to look at what attachment is so you can understand then what non-attachment would be. So kind of the opposite of this. So attachment involves clinging to thoughts, emotions, and outcomes, leading to a sense of self that's really entangled with desires and fears. Attachment really does, when you look at it like deep down, has a lot to do with fear. And it's an unavoidable part of human nature. And we often get attached to all kinds of things. So some examples of this is, a need to make a certain amount of money. You're attached to an outcome. Not talking about needing to make money to like make ends meet, but I don't know why words are so hard today. But if you're saying, okay, when I make $90,000 a year, then I'll be happy, right? You're attached to this particular outcome. If you need to have 5,000 followers on social media, you're attached to the approval. If you're constantly working out because you want to reach a certain weight, you're attached to your body in that particular way or a certain number on a scale. When you see yourself as good and as others as bad based on a political party, you're attached to a belief. And I found that kind of these 4 examples were really good, like real day, this is what attachment can look like. And I think it's easy for this obsessive need or fixation with something to lead to suffering, especially when sort of our inner reality doesn't match our expectations. So if we're really attached to certain expectations and things don't go that way, that is so hard. And so non-attachment really means engaging with experiences without fixating on a need for them. So another example that they gave is instead of exercising solely to hit a target weight, embracing non-attachment in fitness would mean like working out just for the joy of movement and its overall health benefits. So just moving your body to move your body because it's good for it, not for any like one particular outcome. And non-attachment isn't just kind of this spiritual idea or this idea more in kind of like the wellness, mindfulness space. There's actually some neuroscience that backs up the idea of non-attachment too. So it's been shown that the more that we practice letting go of rigid expectations, the more resilient and emotionally regulated we become. So non-attachment actually helps to soothe the nervous system. It gives our brain space to respond rather than to react. And so to be rather than to cling, or to do things like listen to hear and not to respond. So it allows you to not always like immediately be on the defensive. And that piece of like, it gives our brain space to respond rather than react. That respond, don't react is something that has always stuck with me as such like a powerful practice when you're building relationships or when you are communicating with people. And just not being as reactive, I think, is an incredible thing. So this is a practice that can be extremely difficult and challenging, but if we can get there, or even like think of non-attachment as kind of like a spectrum, so we can move closer to non-attachment, it can be super helpful, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed by things when they don't go to plan, or you're anxious about trying to control everything, or you really feel burdened by like what other people think or what other people do, and you do more reacting instead of responding. And that's really sort of that quiet power of non-attachment, is giving you a little bit more freedom from those things, from not feeling so overwhelmed when things don't go to plan, or letting go of some of that anxiety around trying to control everything, or just not being as burdened by other people's thoughts and actions. And it is a really hard practice, but it's also an incredible practice. So I wanted to dive into sort of the Buddhist roots of this practice, and also look at non-attachment from both a yoga lens and a meditation lens. So in Buddhism, the concept of non-attachment is central. So the Buddha taught that attachment, our clinging, our craving, our grasping, is one of the root causes of human suffering, not because we love or care too much, but because we become overly fixated on outcomes and identities, relationships, or even ideas of what life should be, or material things. And even taking that word should, like, out of my vocabulary in a way, or every time I hear myself saying should, I take that as kind of like a little like, hello, pay attention, something's going on here, look a little deeper here, because this word should always shows up in situations where we need to look a little bit deeper. So this comes up in Buddhism in the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths is one of these foundational teachings of Buddhism, which outlines the nature of suffering and the path to liberation. So the Four Noble Truths: 1, suffering exists in many forms, dissatisfaction, impermanence, loss. Also, please know this is very much like very simple, like simplified version of this. Like there's so much more to it. It's so much deeper. This is just very much like the TLDR of like the Four Noble Truths. 2, the cause of suffering is tanha, I believe is how you pronounce that. I tried to look up a pronunciation. It's a Pali word, and it translates to thirst or craving. And it's really just this word of saying that like craving, clinging, desire, it really is the cause of suffering, right? It's that feeling of I need this to be happy, or I can't be okay unless I have this. 3, there is a way to end suffering. It's by letting go of craving. And then 4, the path to the end of suffering is the Eightfold Path. So you can see right here, like a big piece of these Four Noble Truths is all about kind of releasing attachment, being able to do this to help alleviate suffering. And so monks and nuns in the Buddhist tradition practice non-attachment in very tangible ways. They live with very few possessions. They often eat only what is offered to them. They follow routines that help reduce their ego and minimize personal preference. They let go of personal relationships and comforts to reduce attachment to identity and ego. And the idea is that the more that you reduce attachments to comfort, control, and identity, the more clearly you can see the true nature of reality. They also have a lot of meditation and mindfulness into their days. They have daily practices that allow them to watch the mind, observe their thoughts and their feelings, allow them to rise and fall, but yet not cling to any of them. And for them, it's not about rejecting life. It's about being in it fully without clinging to it. So monks still feel joy, compassion, love, but they really aim to hold those feelings lightly. So they recognize their impermanence. And that's really the essence of non-attachment. It's being fully present without holding on to it. And so they really strive to engage without ownership or clinging. And I find this to be so fascinating. And it's something that when I was living with the monks for a little bit, I just found it to be so interesting. I've talked so much about that experience on this podcast because it really was formational. But this idea of like non-attachment, of not clinging, even with the good stuff. I remember they talked about this a lot too. Like a lot of suffering is because we're always trying to lean into the good and avoid the bad. And even our attachments to like what is good, what is bad can cause suffering. But constantly trying to avoid anything that feels like less than pleasant and just trying to do everything that feels good to us, that really can be a pitfall and kind of a trap for this attachment of being so attached to just like the good stuff. And so I remember when we had like our daily chores and we had to do these things, like I'd like sweep the meditation hall or do dishes after breakfast or weed the paving stones between the bathroom and the meditation hall, things like that. I was really encouraged to like just be present and to not really have expectations going into the chore and just kind of let the experience be what it was. And I did find that I had resistance to it at first, but it really became so much more comfortable and honestly much more pleasant. And they would talk about, often you would think about doing a chore as kind of like this bad, like, oh, I have to, get on my hands and knees and like weed these paving stones. I don't want to do that. I want to do the thing that feels good. I want to go on my walking meditation, or for us, it might be like, I want to scroll on my phone or whatever it is. And even the things that feel really good, that is also not permanent. Nothing is permanent. And so we can't just attach ourselves to that as well. So I always found that to be just a really interesting concept. So when we look at non-attachment, so that was non-attachment through kind of like the Buddhist lens in a way, the very kind of high level, SparkNotes version, but looking at non-attachment through like the yoga lens, because we see this come up in yoga a lot too. So in the yogic tradition, non-attachment is one of the 5 yamas or ethical guidelines for how we interact with the world and ourselves. And in Sanskrit, it's called aparigraha, which translates to non-grasping or non-possessiveness. And so this teaching really invites us to let go of attachment, not only to things, but also to people, titles, achievements, even our own ideas about who we think we should be. And in our yoga practice, this might show up in really simple ways, but honestly really powerful ways. And it might be like not forcing yourself into a particular pose just because you think you should be able to do it, or you see other people doing it and so you want to do it, or letting go of the outcome of your practice, whether it felt good or bad, right? Just letting the practice be what it is and not labeling it in this, it was good or bad. Being willing to release the idea that yoga needs to look a certain way for it to be valuable. And then also letting go of material goods or wanting to wear particular clothes to your yoga classes. Like a yoga practice is still great, whether it's in a Lululemon matching set or if it's in your sweatpants. And, either one, letting go of, I'm not saying, everyone get rid of your cute matching sets and only wear sweatpants. I'm just saying that letting go of the attachment of wanting certain material goods around your yoga practice can be a form of non-attachment. And I'll sometimes touch on this too when I'm teaching like a physical yoga class. And I might say things like pretend like there's blinders on your mat so you don't feel the need to compare. Try not to compare your current self to a past self, even if it was just yesterday, because comparison never helps. Reminding my students that every day on your mat, your body is different. Everything is a different day, different body, different circumstances, everything. Just moving your body in a way that just feels good. And I really like to encourage my students to kind of approach their practice with curiosity instead of expectations. And so just listening to the body as it is today rather than trying to make it perform the way it did yesterday or the way you think it, quote, should. And to try not to fuel our practice with like these desired outcomes. Because really when we embrace non-attachment, like our physical practice, like yoga, we really flex and build the muscle of acceptance, and non-attachment and acceptance are good friends that like to hold hands. And it's from that place that something really magical can happen. We can start to feel a little bit more at peace, a little bit more present, more appreciation for the moment and our bodies and our ability to move and all of that as it is. And then when we look at non-attachment from the meditation lens, this one is, so good. I love all of these things. But when we talk about meditation, this is where non-attachment, it really becomes, it's not just a principle, but it's like this moment-to-moment practice. It is like meditation itself is like the practice of non-attachment. And there's a reason that those monks that we talked about, or that, I experienced, that they practice so much meditation. And one of those reasons is that it really helps you to cultivate this deep non-attachment practice. Because every time you sit to meditate, your mind will wander. It's going to get distracted. That is just a given. And it's an important part of the process. And when we talk about this, we do talk about this all the time, not only on this podcast, but you'll hear other meditation teachers talk about this, is that the practice is not to stop your thoughts. It's not about if your mind's the light bulb, you're just going to turn the light off. It's about noticing when the mind has drifted, and then without judgment, gently returning to your anchor or your point of concentration, whatever that is, whether it's your breath, a mantra, a body sensation, the journey or the words that I'm leading you through in a guided practice. And that simple act itself is a practice of non-attachment. So I always call it don't follow the thread. And it's like, in your clothes where you have like a seam or something or some stitching and there'll be like a little thread. And have you ever gone to like pull it and then all of a sudden it's like, it just starts like unraveling the whole thing? I feel like this happens with my kids' clothes a lot. And you'll pull it and then all of a sudden it's like, zzz, and the thread just like keeps coming. There's like, it's not just a little thread you thought it was. It just keeps going. Mentally, when we are meditating, don't follow the thread. The thread can be anything. It can be thinking about your to-do list. It can be worrying about, like I said, that first day of preschool and just knowing that you're sending your kid into what's probably going to be a really challenging situation. It can be don't follow the thread thinking about whatever TV show you watched last night. The thread can be anything. And we work to not follow the thread. That is also non-attachment. So you're learning to really observe your thoughts without clinging to them. And you're training your awareness to stay open and steady and calm, even in the face of discomfort or boredom or distraction. So we like to think about meditation as being like all sunshine and rainbows and like, this magical thing. And it is that. And I was reminded of this, actually, it was yesterday. I was driving the kids and my mom was in the car too. The four of us were going to go do something together. And in my neighborhood, like, I don't know, a few blocks from my house, I was driving and I saw this woman in my neighborhood sitting on her front porch doing like a morning meditation. It was probably like, 9 o'clock in the morning. And I like almost stopped the car, like unintentionally. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I pointed out to her, I was like, Mom, look, that woman is having such a beautiful morning meditation. And I felt so excited to just like see someone meditating out in the wild, like on her front porch. It was so nice. It was so beautiful. And she looked so peaceful. Like I felt more peaceful just like looking at her meditating on her porch. And it was like just a little bit of sun on her face. Truly, I was like, that looks like the perfect morning meditation. But the thing that we have to remember, And that like I was reminded of too, having that experience yesterday and then today, like writing these notes, is that even if what you see on the outside looks so peaceful and like perfect and like still, there's a lot happening on the inside. It was happening to that woman having that beautiful morning meditation. It happens to me. It happens to all of us. And this is where we have to work on don't follow the thread. Don't allow yourself to get tied down to any particular outcome for your meditation, whether it was like good or bad, but just being and noticing and accepting the impermanence of everything in life, even our own thoughts and our own feelings. And I think this can be especially powerful when we're meditating on emotions or experiences. So you may notice things like anxiety or frustration or even like joy. And rather than grabbing onto it or pushing it away, the invitation in meditation is to just notice it, to just let it be there, to let it be there. And then when it naturally passes, it'll pass. To sit with the sensation and not to cling with it. And then also not to cling to certain desires or outcomes. And it's also important, and when we meditate, to think about, I do this one sometimes, to not cling to a certain outcome like this meditation is going to fix my whole life. Like just the other day, I was feeling so frustrated at my husband, and it must have been such a small thing because I don't even remember what I was mad about. But I was really frustrated about something, who knows what. I was like, okay, and I knew I needed a break. So I went to take a little break. I went into my bedroom, I shut the door, and I was like, I'm just going to look up like meditations for frustration because I was feeling so frustrated. And I remember I had to kind of chuckle at myself because I just found one, like a random one, which I know so many of you, if I'm the random person that when you were maybe mad at your husband or couldn't sleep one night or whatever it is, and you type something into a search bar and I showed up and you hit play, thank you for hitting play and thank you for sticking around. I do that sometimes too. And so I was like, okay, whatever. This one says it's going to help me with anger and frustration. That's perfect because that's what I'm feeling. And I hit play and it started. And I remember thinking to myself, like, you better fix my whole life right now. And then I just, honestly, I felt better just like laughing at myself because I was like, you better fix all of my problems right now. I'm so heated for whatever's, I honestly don't even remember what it was. It must have been like just one of those small little things. But not even having like an attachment to an outcome of being like, I am feeling angry and frustrated. This meditation better make me feel better. I need to feel better after this. All of that is practicing non-attachment. And the more that we can practice this, the more that we can carry it into our everyday life. So the more we practice non-attachment, the more we become less reactive. We don't take things as personally. We stop having this need for life to go a certain way in order to feel okay, or things to go a certain way so we can feel a certain way. And then we're able to just sit and be in the ebbs and flows of life. And that's really the power of non-attachment. It liberates us, not, from life, but from the suffering that comes from trying to control it all. Because here's the thing, discomfort, suffering, all of that, it is going to be in our lives. That is just part of the human experience, but we don't have to make it worse by really trying to control every single thing that comes from it. And I actually came across, while I was researching for this episode and putting together my notes, a style of meditation that I hadn't heard of. I'm not sure if it's a style or just kind of like a concept, but I'm definitely going to look at it more closely. And it was called the Who Am I meditation. And this particular meditation is a form of non-attachment meditation that is about stripping away all the false or temporary identities that we cling to. So like our roles, our jobs, our emotions, our thoughts, and discovering the true self, which is often like, about kind of, consciousness itself, that deeper presence, just connecting with the true self. And it's not like mantra or breath based. It's just kind of about like self-inquiry. And it's this like identity non-attachment. I thought it was so interesting. So I just had to mention that there, that there are like some particular kind of styles of meditation too, that are like really specific to non-attachment. So I don't know. We're gonna put that. We're gonna keep that tab open because I really want to dive deeper into this Who Am I meditation. So why practice non-attachment? We have looked at what is it. How do these different lenses of Buddhism, yoga, and meditation, how do they kind of have their own unique take on non-attachment? But why should you practice this? It frees us from suffering that's caused by craving, expectations, and resistance. So much of our pain, not just emotional, but even sometimes that physical stress too, it comes from grasping, from wanting things to be different than they are, for wanting a person to act differently or treat you differently. This is one that, oh my gosh, it would have saved me so much heartbreak if, and just emotional strife of this, wanting people to act differently or treat you differently. This is one that I had a really hard time with, like in a lot of my childhood and early adulthood. But it really just does cause so much suffering. And like, I can't control what other people think or do, but yet I was so tied to it. That was so tough. And then also thinking things like, when I have X amount of dollars in the bank account, then I will be happy. All this resistance, it just creates tension. And non-attachment really invites us to loosen the grip, to stop chasing, controlling, or resisting, and instead just be present with what is. When we do this, we're really creating space for joy and presence and peace. And non-attachment makes more room for just small, special moments, for being present, for not constantly having to grip and chase those moments, because you're not obsessing over what happened yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow. You're just simply here. And that's really where the joy lies. It's also really helpful for our nervous system and our mental health. So non-attachment reduces anxiety around the things that we can't control. And let's be honest, most things fall into that category. When we cling to control, we activate that fight or flight response. Our nervous system stays stuck in that high alert. But when we practice non-attachment, when we say to ourselves, I don't have control over this, all I can do is just be with it, the nervous system starts to regulate, and we move from that sympathetic stress state to a parasympathetic rest and digest state. And that's where we can really heal. That's where we can breathe a little bit deeper, sleep a little bit better, feel a little more grounded, even in the uncertainty. And then non-attachment really helps us live in the moment without needing everything to be perfect. So often we tend to delay our happiness. We say, I'll feel better about myself when I get this job, or I'll be at peace when my house is clean. That one's me. And I'm like, I will truly be at peace when this house is clean, which, let's be real, that is never, I don't think it's ever going to happen. Or I'll be at peace when my partner understands me better, or anything else. These are just other forms of attachment, of believing that we need certain conditions to feel okay or to be happy. And often the truth is, you don't actually need these things. Do I really need my house to be clean to be at peace? No. Would it probably help and it would feel good to once and for all have this house clean? Yeah, but that's not like the thing. I'm just delaying my happiness by saying things like that. I can find those things within myself already. And so non-attachment really says, what if I don't wait? What if I didn't attach myself to outcomes or to the responses and actions of others? What if I just allowed peace and joy and presence right now, regardless of what life looks like, or if it looks the way that I thought it should? And it is not easy. This is very much a practice. It's one that you will probably have to return to. I have to return to time and time again. But every time that I soften into what is and I let go of how I think it should be, I do find a little bit more ease and freedom in that. And so the last kind of couple of things that I wanted to touch on is I want to talk about just a couple of ways that attachment can kind of show up, sort of sneaky ways in our modern life, and then how can you practice non-attachment in the big tough life stuff, and then some simple, like, real ways that we can practice non-attachment in our everyday life. So when we look at attachment, some of the ways that it can show up just in an everyday life is attachment to outcomes like success, productivity, control, attachments to certain roles. So maybe, your role as a mother or a partner or a teacher or an overachiever or a business owner. Emotional clinging, so needing lots of validation, fear of letting go, fear of being hurt in relationships, perfectionism can be an attachment to like our image or, wanting things to be right. And I think a lot about my everyday life. And as I mentioned, when I was first starting like Yoga for You, I had a lot of people that weren't supportive or said that it was kind of just like a dumb idea. And I really had to work. I think this is why this resonated with me so much when I was taking this yoga teacher training, was I felt this pull in my heart to teach yoga. And I had so many people saying that like, either it's not a real job. And now that this is 13 years ago. So the way that we looked at this kind of a profession was a little bit different. But people really poo-pooed this idea and said I should get like a real job. Like it was beneath me, or why would I just graduated with a college degree. Why would I go teach yoga? And all of this, it was just so hurtful. And so much of it was because I was so attached to what other people thought. And I think then when I started to learn about non-attachment, it resonated with me so deeply because I was like, wait a minute. First of all, I do have an attachment to these things, and you're saying that I don't have to feel this way. And it was just so eye-opening to me. And then I still find myself, right, as life changes, as our circumstances change, there's different things to be attached to. One that I find now sometimes is my attachment to my role, and sometimes my conflicting role. And they don't have to be conflicting roles of like being a mom and also being a business owner. Like when I go to things, like my husband's work functions, and then a lot of times people ask me, they'll be like, oh, do you work? Which like, there's a lot to unpack there in that question, because like no one asks my husband, like, oh, when he comes to my functions, like, oh, do you work outside of the home? No one's asking him that, but I get asked that like all the time. And I want to be like, yeah, I do work. Let me tell you about this amazing job that I have, because first of all, my job is amazing. I have like, every day just so much gratitude for like what I get to do every day. And also I have so much gratitude for the fact that like I do stay at home part of the time with like my kids too. And that's what really just works for me. And I find that sometimes I do still have these attachments as to what people will think, whichever answer. I'm like, yeah, I do work, but also I stay home and I do these things. And like, I find myself still getting stuck in that trap of like attachment as to like what other people think about what I'm doing. And I have to remind myself, first of all, why do I care so much? And two, why am I, attached to what other people think, or what other people's reactions will be to the way that I've designed my life to be the best for me and my happiness, and also like my family's health and happiness too. So I still find myself, struggling with this at times as circumstances change. So let's talk about what you do in the hard times, because I want to be really honest here. And this is where I struggle with non-attachment, just like as a concept, is it's easy for me. And maybe you've done this throughout the episode, is thinking about like really hard situations where you're like, okay, but like non-attachment wouldn't work there. Non-attachment is not about pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. It's not spiritual bypassing or ignoring like the deep pain that life can, and at some point in your life will bring. And I would never sit with someone and tell them someone who had just lost a child, or is watching a loved one suffer through cancer, or is, has experienced trauma, to say, just let it go. Or like, well, why don't you just release your attachments to it? That's not what non-attachment means. And non-attachment, it's not about caring. It's about just learning to soften your grip, not on your love, not on your grief, but more on this illusion that we can control outcomes. And I think when I was first learning about non-attachment, this is where I felt resistance to it, because of course I had this really strong attachment to, for example, like when my mom was sick, wanting her to live. Like, of course I did. That is so normal. And if someone would have been like, oh, just let it go, it's all going to be okay no matter what happens. Like, no. When I was 16, if my mom would have died, like it wouldn't have been okay. And it's really about learning how to let go of this illusion that we can control the outcomes. So in situations that are painful and tragic, like non-attachment does not take the pain away from that, but it can offer you maybe just a little bit more space to breathe inside of it, a little bit more presence, a little bit more grace. It's, saying that I can't fix this, I can't change this, but I can be with it. I can't stop fighting what already is, but I can let myself feel it fully without needing it to look a certain way. And then in more kind of everyday moments, maybe things that aren't as big as like watching someone that you love suffer, things like not making the amount of money that you need to face, that you need, like to make ends meet, or facing uncertainty at work, things that are still really big life things. Non-attachment can help us kind of loosen the panic and reduce anxiety and make space for maybe new perspectives and possibilities. So maybe shifting from I have to control this to I'll meet this moment as best I can, or I trust myself to keep showing up in this moment. And non-attachment is not some magic solution, but sometimes it can help with a little bit of shift in perspective. And that might be enough to kind of just help us move through some of these hard things with a little bit more strength and softness at the same time. So I just wanted to kind of call that out. I don't want anyone to hear kind of that, this non-attachment of like if something really hard is happening in life or you're going through something and it's not just like, oh, let it go, or just no, it's all going to be fine and all of that. Like life is still going to be there, and to have the full human experience is also going to include things like pain and suffering and hardship and all of that. And so when you look at non-attachment in that lens, it's really just letting go again of that illusion that we can control outcomes, and maybe giving yourself permission to like fully be with it. And even sometimes this concept of like not following the thread, I find can be really helpful. And I think like in the psych world, they call it like catastrophizing thinking, where you're like, okay, well, this one thing happened. Someone gets, for example, a cancer diagnosis, and then you find yourself like you're already planning their funeral in a way, even though you don't know what's going to happen. Like following that thread and taking you to just like the worst possible outcome. Not following the thread in that way too can also kind of be a form of non-attachment and helping to kind of soften that grip in a way. So some ways that we can practice non-attachment, like simple, practical, like every day you could do one of these things today kind of practices. The first is going to be mindfulness practice, just regular old mindfulness, observing your thoughts without latching on to them. Maybe even just taking 3 minutes to just sit with your thoughts and observe, not latching onto them. Don't follow any threads. Don't attach yourself to the thoughts. Just observe them. Any kind of yoga or breath work, this is also going to help release some of that control for the body, letting it just be what it is. Move your body and just because it feels good, or just be present in the experience of moving. Meditating on the concept of impermanence or non-attachment, right? Everything changes. Everything is impermanent. Everything is changing and flowing. Let it. Be present with that. Sit with that. You could use some kind of a mantra like, I let go of what I can't control, or I hold on to life lightly. Journaling can be really good. So journal prompts like writing about, what am I gripping tightly that's ready to be released? Or what outcome is out of my control that I'm clinging to? Or what attachments am I ready to release? Pausing before reacting, noticing when you're about to cling to an outcome, an opinion, or an emotion, and just take one breath before you respond. It can be really helpful. Releasing expectations. So going into situations like meetings, conversations, dates, whatever it is, with curiosity instead of a script for how you think things should go. Just go in with just curiosity. Detaching from your to-do list. This is one that I need a lot of help with. Finish what you can, but don't tie your self-worth to productivity. My own therapist could have said this one to me, right? Some days are for doing less. And so detaching yourself from your to-do list, your productivity. You could declutter a little bit. So maybe letting go of a few physical items that no longer serve you. This can kind of be a powerful practice for like emotionally letting go or not being attached to your physical things. Try being with discomfort without fixing it. So whether it's your own feelings or someone else's, just allow the experience to be there without rushing to change it or fix it. Unplugging intentionally, so spending some time offline, even like 10 minutes, letting go of your need to like know and respond or scroll or, get updates on like every single little thing. That can be really great. And the last one, say yes to change. So when planned shift or something unexpected happens, try meeting it with some openness instead of resistance and kind of accepting that impermanence and that kind of go with the flow attitude. So maybe just pick one of those to try today and just see what it's like. And that is it. That is non-attachment. I hope this gave you some food for thought. Like I said, you'll start to notice this and hear this coming up in other things too, like the let them theory. Mel Robbins really talks about like, okay, and then like let them feel however they want to feel. Like you don't have to attach yourself to others' outcomes. But you'll start to see these themes popping up elsewhere too, because it's not a new idea. It is a challenging practice. It's complex, but it's not a new idea. So I hope you found this interesting and it gave you something to think about. And I will see you on Sunday for a non-attachment themed meditation. And I just wanted to, as we're going, just take a moment to, so if you're still here, so deeply and honestly thank you for being here and for listening to what I have to say, being a part of this community, and know that I think of you often and that I'm so grateful that you're here. So thank you for being here, and I will see you on Sunday for a meditation.